Let's go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Glad you looked at the schedule. We haven't been on for a couple weeks, but we have a very interesting presentation from Jeff and Kyle tonight. All the things that can possibly go wrong with your setups. Of course, nothing ever goes wrong with my setup. Camera always works. Guider always works. It's always clear. Oh, no, none of those things are true. We all struggle with all those things that can go wrong, and we always like ways to improve it. And Jeff and Kyle are going to tell us about that, right, guys? But before we do that, a couple things. Gary M's going to be on in a couple weeks. Gary always has fascinating presentations. I think he does more imaging than anybody else on AstroBin. Is that right, Gary? Or at least almost everyone. So he's going to be on. Yeah, he displaced me as #1. I know. I'm sad, but I'll live with that. Anyway, Gary, you want to give us like a little quick pitch on what you're going to talk about in a couple weeks?
Sure. Can I just talk, or do I need to switch something over to
No,
me?
just talk.
Okay, great. So it's thank you for the invite. Yeah, this is the 5th year I've been back, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk. My title of my talk is Imaging the Sharpless Catalog. So I spent the last 5 years or so imaging the 313 object sharpless catalog. And I think as an imager, if I just had to pick one catalog of them all, we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, to image, it would be sharpless catalog, simply because it's all nebula, and there's some surprisingly interesting nebula in there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my book, which I put out on Amazon, but mostly just talking about the history of the sharpless catalog, the paper, the 2 papers that Dr. Sharpless published, and some of the interesting data that he put in there, some of the logic for why he put some of these objects into the catalog, left others out, and look at some of those objects and see how he viewed them through some of the, through the images he used to determine whether they should be in the catalog. And then talk about the extent of the catalog, the different objects, the size ranges, the scoring that I've given to each object, and really just to help all of us out, all of you out, for those of you that are interested in imaging objects. I think the Sharpless catalog has some of the best kind of obscure objects if you're not familiar with them. There's some really interesting ones that hardly anybody ever images. And especially if you want to tackle some of them in full narrowband. Now, most of the objects I've looked at, I think probably about 70% are just mainly hydrogen. But some of them are great full narrowband targets. And so we'll talk about that and show you, obviously show you a lot of pictures from that. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, and for the discussion that'll follow. It's always an interesting time. So Eric, thank you for inviting me to say that.
And I love the Sharpless catalog because, like, it's full moon. What do? I can't do RGB. You always look at those sharpless objects that are especially the strong HA. And even after you get past the really big, exciting ones, the ones that everyone knows, a lot of those HA emitters have some very interesting structures. Yeah, and they're always available all month long.
Yep, the whole year.
Yep, a whole year. And after Gary, we have another break. Let's see. We got no show on Thanksgiving, of course. We have an open date on December 7th. So if there's anyone out there that would like to fill in and has a title to something they'd like to present, go to the astroimagingchannel.org, go to the contact page, and just send us a little note, and we can get you on that schedule. And after that, Brian Koppelman on AAVSO. That's always interesting. And no show for Christmas. And then January, we have a lot of open shows. And once again, if you have something you'd like to talk about, a procedure, a process, things that you might think are kind of unusual or unique or helpful, send us a note. Someone will contact you and you'll be on the show. And after that, I think we're ready. Jeff, Kyle, you going to tell us how not to make our telescopes fall off our mounts?
I certainly hope so.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
All right, let me share my screen here.
Share your entire screen. You know the drill.
All right. Well, thank you guys for inviting us, and thank you for all the viewers. This is going to be a talk both by myself, Kyle, as well as Jeff, and we have side-by-side observatories that we actually built at the same time at Deer Lick Astronomy Village in Georgia. So tonight we're going to talk about fully automated remote imaging at your own observatory, where you have to control the roof and make everything safe, and all the sorts of ways where that can go wrong and how to prevent it from doing so. Jeff, this is yours.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so the thing that Kyle and I had both originally focused on was doing everything we could to try to avoid needing to sync your mounts with your roof. So in other words, ensuring that your roof can close without hitting any of your telescopes. It drastically simplifies things, as you'll see later in the presentation when we dive into how many different things you have to do and redundancies you have to plan for. And it just really makes everything easier. So it's not always possible though. And so that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, so unfortunately, although both of us planned our observatories around never having the roof interfere with the telescopes, we both ended up, about a year in or so, convincing one another that actually it would be okay and we could figure this out and it wouldn't be so bad and it would be worth it. So the observatory there on the right is mine, and then Jeff's is the one that you can just see on the left of this picture here. So they really are like right next to each other. So the problem that we're facing here is that a lot of times, if you have a large scope, especially, it may be that in order to get the angle that you want on the sky, it just has to be higher than it can park and allow the roof to close without it, being in a certain position. So because of that, a lot of times, unless you have a roof that rolls off with parts of the walls attached to it, which a lot of observatories are being built that way these days, unless you have that sort of a setup, you frequently run into this problem of your mount needing to be parked in a certain way so that it isn't struck by the roof when it closes. It's really important, obviously, that you make sure that's the case, because these mounts, I mean, they're beefy things, but if you hit them with a really heavy roof, especially if you hit the scope itself, you're probably going to do a fair amount of damage. So you really don't want that to happen. And you also don't want the observatory to be stuck open with the rain coming in, or, something like that, getting all over everything. Although I'll say I have had rain in my observatory, so we've learned all of these lessons the hard way, certainly. And it's not the end of the world if you get rain in your observatory. Of course, your equipment gets water on it all the time from dew and frost. So, frequently there's no real damage done, but you still want to avoid it if you possibly can. And you certainly want a system that will alert you to what has gone wrong if the roof is stuck open for any reason. So we're going to talk about all of those sorts of things. And first, we're going to start talking about the devices and software that are necessary to have a reliable setup. So Jeff and I have taken slightly different approaches. There's a lot of overlap because we work together on a lot of these things, but he made a few different decisions than I did. So we're going to give you kind of two views of how to do things, because I think it's valuable to see different approaches to solve the same problem. Certainly your approach to solve the problem will be different from either of ours because your circumstances will be different. So given that, it's best to see when there are, different approaches so you can match it to your situation. So I think we have some things in common. We're both using the Dragonfly roof controller. We're both using the Cloud Watcher weather station, but we're using different observatory controllers, different parking sensors, a little bit different software, although we both use some of the same items. So I think Jeff is going to give a little more in-depth look at what his specific setup looks like here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so we both centralize the very critical functions of the observatory around the Lunatico Dragonfly and the Lunatico Cloud Watcher, as Kyle mentioned. We've both had really good experiences with these units and also the support that the company provides. Effectively, the Dragonfly is a sensor-based system where your safety devices can tie in and send safe or unsafe signals. And that could even be things like mount position sensors or your roof position sensors, rain sensors. The Cloud Watcher has weather sensors. We both have the All Sky, which you can see on the left. That's actually also used as an additional safety device for star count detection. So you can detect clouds with the Cloud Watcher, but star count with the All Sky. We'll get into a little bit more detail on that and why it's important later. And then in my case, I've added some Arduino devices. And then we both have web power switches that allow remote power control, as well as provide automated power cycling, which is something that we'll get into later as well. Very important. And then AC power detection. So even though there's a UPS down there on the bottom right, which will allow you to close your roof and be safe even in the event of a power outage, you need to know that the power has gone out. So AC detection is a component that I think we've both added in slightly different ways. And then I can't remember, Kyle, how you're doing it, so maybe you'll cover it in a bit. But in my case, I did create custom ASCOM safety drivers for both the peer PCs, both peers, as well as the central PC. For anyone that's panicking when they hear that, believe me, it's really not that complicated. If you have any type of scripting or programming background, and if you don't, you can probably get somebody to help you write one, but they're very simple. I mean, it's either safe or unsafe. And I think in the case of me, and maybe Kyle, he'll get into it later as well, because all of your safety sensors are feeding into the Dragonfly, and the Dragonfly has an API that you can call. You have your ASCOM drivers call the Dragonfly to get the safety status. And that way, both the Dragonfly detects unsafe and it can close the roof, and so can your PCs. So for here, I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to Kyle.
Yeah, and that's a really critical point, that you have multiple things capable of closing the roof. So you never want a single point of failure on any of these safety critical systems. We're going to talk a lot about that in the next section about ensuring physical safety. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question. You just mentioned that you've got a Cloud Watcher and an All Sky camera. Do both of you have one of those on your observatory?
We do, yeah. We both have our own Cloud Watcher and our own All Sky camera, yeah.
Would it be possible, if you have two observatories next door to each other, that you have them there and they're somehow interconnected so that you don't have to buy two of them?
Yeah, no, there's a few of these opportunities for, sharing things where, so we actually met one another through the process of building these observatories next to each other. So we didn't know each other beforehand. Now we actually work at the same place as well. But, so we planned out these observatories pretty independently before building them separately, and so we didn't really plan to share stuff, and it would have been great if we had.
Yeah, if you'd known about it. Can you Andrew wants to know if you can share two Dragonflies.
That would be more difficult since there's two roofs to be controlled, and you'd have to have some. Yeah, I don't think that would be very feasible.
Yeah, I'll chime in here too a little bit. So the All Sky camera for star detection, that would be very easy to share because it has an API that you can call and you can share the pictures and everything like that. The Cloud Watcher would be a little tougher. because of the way that it interfaces with your system. It doesn't have a native API in it that I recall.
Only because you don't use the CloudWatcher Solo like I do.
Solo, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so the Solo has an API on it though.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that would do it. But yeah, your Dragonfly, in addition to the sensor inputs that it has, and then the scripting and the software in it, it has the relays that send the signal to your roof motor, and that's hardwired. And so that would not be a device that you could share.
Well, the reason I'm asking is I work with a club that's got 25 observatories on their observing site, and everybody's buying their own. And we could just make it a point to have one, and somehow the information is available. You just query the information and you get the information. Is that right?
Yeah, the weather sensor and the all sky are frequently shared amongst observatories when there's a number in the same place. So I would definitely encourage that. If you've got 25 observatories, no reason to have 25 weather sensors and 25 all sky cameras, maybe 2 of each.
Okay, thanks. And that's
Yeah.
all the questions we have sitting here now.
I
Great.
can tell you at the SRO, we share weather sensors.
Yeah. I think if we had thought of this through more, the most valuable thing to share would have been our internet connection, because, you know, that costs us every month. So that would have been a nice thing to share. We should have run some cable underneath our pads between the observatories. All right, so the first most important thing to know if you have a roof that can impact your scope when it closes is whether your scope is parked or not, and whether it's parked at the right position. So it is really important to know with redundancy. So I think both of us check 2 different methods to ensure that our scopes are parked. So the first and easiest one is to just ask the scope, are you parked, and, you know, what's your alt-azimuth position? And a lot of, you know, the sorts of mounts that you would use for a remote observatory, astrophysics 10 micron, those sorts of mounts, they have an API, they have network connection, they have an API that you can ask where they are and whether they're parked. I use astrophysics mounts, and so does Jeff, and they have that capability, and it's very handy. Secondly, though, you need a physical sensor. This is an important enough thing that you can't trust that the software is just going to be right. Even though, you know, our mounts have absolute encoders, in theory, they should never get lost. And if they say that they're parked at the right position, they really ought to be parked at that position. I'm still not going to chance, you know, $50,000 worth of equipment getting bashed by a roof on that. So we both have different methods of monitoring the physical position of our mounts. I use a Dark Dragon's tilt sensor. I think it's really handy, and it's really easy to install, and you know, it's cheap too. You can also use like a reflector with a beam break sensor like you use in a garage. You can use magnetic sensors, which Jeff will tell you more about on his section, because he used those. And there's lots of other options as well. And then you need to know where the roof is, right? So you need to know if the roof is open, is the roof closed? Is it somewhere in between? Is it moving? Is it not moving? You need to have some sort of an interlock. I use a safety software-based interlock. It would be even better if you had a hardware-based interlock where, you know, it physically blocked the movement if the scopes were not parked appropriately. But I'm relying on, you know, the Dragonfly not energizing the relays when the scopes are not parked. So, you know, essentially, anytime the roof is moving, the scopes can't move. Anytime the scopes are moving, the roof can't move. So those are kind of the golden rules. And then finally, we both have cameras inside our observatory. So if the system knows that things are not the way they're supposed to be, you know, it doesn't know where the roof is, it doesn't know where the scope is, whatever the situation is, it's going to alert you, and you can physically look on the camera and see where things are. So that's your kind of final backup. Well, I guess in our case, the final backup is a guy who lives nearby with keys to our observatories. But the final remote backup is, you know, those cameras.
Shout out to Dan.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, to continue on with the parking sensor, you know, the way that it would normally flow, and this can vary for a lot of people because some people might have one PC in their observatory on one pier, and that controls both the telescope and the roof and everything else. In the case of Kyle and I, we both have two piers in our observatories, and then I have, for example, a third computer that's the central control computer. So for example, if in your sequence, and we both use Nina, and really like that, it's free. Probably if you're watching this, you probably are already using it. But you know, if you are trying to control your roof and your telescope, you can have all the logic right in there. But if you have a separate one, you have you know, a central PC that's controlling your roof, and then the peer PC controlling the telescope, things get a lot more complicated. You can't have, you know, multiple computers all communicating to the mount at the same time. So basically, you know, you issue the park command through the ASCOM driver, and then so many different things can happen, right? The mount could park but never respond and say that it did. The mount could think it parked, but it actually didn't park. If you have like I said, a PC that's controlling your roof that's separate, that makes things complicated as well. So the reliability is absolutely key. And you can see down in the image below on the left, I just used a magnetic position switch. It basically is open, just two wires going into it that are open and disconnected. And then it closes that connection when it senses a magnet. I actually ordered it from McMaster-Carr online. And then for the mounts, I just designed something up really quick in Fusion and 3D printed it on a 3D printer, and then screwed the sensors in. And then I simply used VHB tape to attach them onto the RA axis of the mount. That's all I need. I can clear at any deck, so I didn't have to put it on the deck axis, but you could as well, and then just wire them in series. Back to you, Kyle.
So cloud detection is probably, you know, the most important safety monitoring that you do, since you really don't want to wait for it to start raining to close your roof. You'd really rather close as soon as you detect clouds. And you know, we haven't figured out a way to image through clouds yet anyway. So if there's clouds, you probably don't want to be imaging. So we both use two different types of cloud detection. One is counting stars on the all sky camera. Downside to that is it only works at night, obviously. But it's really reliable at night. As long as your all sky camera dome is clean and free of dew, this count of stars is going to be a very reliable indicator of whether you should be imaging or not. You do need a pretty good camera in the all sky so that you can reliably count stars, but pretty much any camera you're going to use for all sky these days will be just fine. We also use Sky IR temperature sensors. That's part of the CloudWatcher weather system. It's nice and it works day or night. It's really nice for if you want to open your roof to cool the observatory before it's dark enough to count stars, which we both do. I think it's, you know, pretty essential really to avoid the you know, the heat coming off of the concrete after the sun goes down, ruining your images. So you know, to know whether you can open or not, a Sky IR temperature sensor is pretty good for that, but it can get tricked by high, thin clouds. Moisture detection is, you know, kind of last resort. You don't want to get in a situation where you're detecting moisture in the observatory, but you certainly want to detect it as quickly as possible if you do. So we've got, both of us have two different rain sensors. One is on the CloudWatcher itself. It's a capacitive rain sensor. It's sensitive to wetness. It'll tell you how wet it is. So, you know, is it wet or is it raining? You can, you know, sort of configure it for what the limits should be. It's heated on the inside of it. You do need to heat your sensors to remove dew and ice in the winter and snow and stuff. We don't get a whole lot of that where we image from, but we get it enough that you definitely need to heat it. And then we both also have a secondary backup raindrop sensor. These are sort of optical sensors. They're meant to detect when water droplets land on the it's not really a dome, but it's sort of a dome that it has on it. You got to mount these really high, because if it has any sort of a shadow on it being cast by like the mast that it's mounted on or your weather station, especially the wind vanes, it will create false positives. So you got to make sure it's high. And then, of course, a humidity monitor is good, because if it gets too humid, you probably don't want to be imaging in like 99% humidity. Jeff and I maybe disagree on this one a little bit. He doesn't, I don't think, close his observatory for humidity. I close mine if it's over 98%, because I just don't like everything being drenched. So bringing all the sensors together is the key. So, you know, each sensor has its positives and its negatives. And so that's why the important sensors need to be redundant, and you need to have a way of understanding what it means if one sensor says one thing and another sensor says another thing. So, you know, which one do you defer to if they disagree? Usually the best case of action is if they disagree, then go with whichever one says it's unsafe. You know, basically always default to unsafe. If any sensor says unsafe, then you're unsafe. That's sort of the normal way to do it. The controller needs to be able to understand sensor failures. So, you know, these things aren't perfect and they will break. You know, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, of course. So if the controller understands that a sensor is broken, then it can disregard it and notify you of that. And then that way, you know, you can continue in a degraded state. Since you do have redundant sensors, you can use those to keep yourself busy even when you have sensors that are broken and you haven't gotten down to your observatory to fix them yet. It's good if all the sensors don't go through one system. So for example, my controller has some sensors that go to it directly, some go to the Dragonfly that I query the Dragonfly for, some go to the weather station that I query the weather station for. So that means if, say, the weather station goes down, I still have my raindrop sensor attached to the Dragonfly that will tell me whether there's rain. I still have my all sky camera counting stars that will tell me if there's clouds. You know, I still have a humidity sensor inside the observatory that goes direct to my controller, so I'll know the humidity, all those kind of things. And then finally, you have to actually automate the roof movement. So this is where it starts to get real. You know, you're moving a big, heavy thing around very expensive equipment. And, you know, if it goes wrong, then it can be a pretty costly error. Especially, you know, one of my scopes is an astrophysics refractor. If that thing gets hit, like, it's not just money. That's a priceless thing. You can't get another one. So, you know, you really do not want to be hitting these things with your roof. So you have to know redundantly all of these things and feed them in. So the sensors go into the controller tells the Dragonfly, you know, whether it should open or not open. The Dragonfly then powers or doesn't power the roof relays, and then those actually power the roof motor. So all of these things have to work, you know, in order for the roof to work properly. I have a custom controller that runs on an ESP32 that I wrote that you can see kind of the interface to it over there on the left. So, you know, allows you to enable or disable the roof, close it or open it manually, park the mounts, release lockout or lock it out manually. So you can essentially, you know, control everything remotely that you could do if you're just sitting there next to it. Gives you some, you know, summary of the data and controls everything, as well as sending alerts if anything is unhealthy. You do have to have backups for everything. So
Could you hold on there for a second, please?
Sure.
Before we go into the next section here, we've been talking a lot about if there's something wrong with the clouds, with the raining or anything, then the session stops and the roof closes, and you have to make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to. if you have a weather source set up in Nina, no, the next question, that was Stan. Thanks, Stan, for your contribution. But John at Astra asks, so when the roof closes because of these things, the sequence stops, obviously. I assume it's obvious. And will it reopen? Will those same weather sensors tell them it's okay to reopen again? And Nina knows that it gets the okay signal.
Yeah, it will. So it will reopen when it becomes safe to do so again. And in Nina, one of the items you can use is there's an instruction, I think it's part of the power-ups, Nina power-ups. It's when becomes unsafe and when becomes safe, basically. So, you know, there's sort of triggers. And, you know, it will say, okay, here are the things that it needs to do when it becomes unsafe. And here's the things that it needs to do when it becomes safe. So things like, okay, park them out when it's safe, or when it's unsafe, rather. You know, stop tracking, park them out. You know, maybe close your if you have a flat panel that's attached to the scope, you know, a flip flat, maybe close that as well. You know, so do those kind of things, and then, you know, do the reverse when it becomes safe. You're gonna unpark the mount, open up the flip flat, and resume the sequence. And depending on how you have your sequence set up, you know, that's a whole topic on its own for another talk, definitely.
Yeah.
How to do all this in Nina. But we both use Nina's target scheduler plugin, which you know, is very handy for making sure that it doesn't just resume the sequence, but rather it may go on to a different target if your previous target wasn't up anymore, for example.
And you do this all through the advanced sequencer.
Yes, yes.
One thing I'd like to add too is that to make things a lot simpler, I kind of figured out a trick on the peer PCs. So if you're in a situation where you have a central PC that's opening and closing your roof when it's time, when it's safe, and then when it's unsafe, it closes. When it becomes safe, it reopens again. You also have to factor that into your peers. Well, one trick that I discovered is that if I tied my safety driver on my peers, not my central PC, but on my peers, if I tie that not only to safety, but to roof open status, it makes my script so much easier, because the peers effectively only see it as safe to image when the roof is open and it's safe, meaning stars, clouds, rain, and so forth. So that takes a lot of logic out.
Yeah, I do the same, and that's sort of the same way if you were at a hosted observatory like SRO or wherever, you know, and you get your safety status from the observatory, where they basically tell you if the roof is open or not. Basically works the same way as that.
Thank you.
So for emergencies, there's so many different things that can go wrong. I mean, there's literally an endless list, and you will never be able to anticipate every possible thing that can go wrong. I mean, you know, been doing this for a while, and I'm sure that we will still find new and interesting emergencies. But you can kind of condense them down to a set of things. So this is my set of the things I consider to be the different categories of emergencies. The roof needs to open, but the scopes won't allow it. So, you know, you're looking to start the night, but your scopes aren't parked for some reason. Maybe you were doing maintenance, you left them in the wrong spot. They were taking flats, which maybe they take flats at not your safe location, although I'd encourage you to have your safe location be the same as the location where you take flats. You know, whatever reason, that's a problem, right? Because now the night can't start. An even worse problem is the roof needs to close, but the scopes aren't safe. They didn't park when you told them to. Maybe the scopes aren't responding for some reason. Maybe they don't have power. You know, there's so many different things. The scopes need to move, but the roof isn't safe. So for example, maybe the roof got stuck opening or stuck closing. Maybe we don't know where the roof is because the sensors, all of the sensors are malfunctioning. Maybe we don't know where the scopes are because all of their sensors are malfunctioning. So this is the list of things that I consider to be emergencies that the controller cannot solve. So these are things where, you know, yes, there will be retry logic. So if the roof needs to close, but the scopes aren't safe, then we're going to try a backup method of making the scope safe, right? We're going to have multiple ways of telling the scopes to park properly. But if we exhaust all of those and the scopes still aren't safe and the roof needs to close, then that's something that needs to wake me up. So we'll go into that in a later section about how we handle notifications and emergencies. But you do need to understand that there is a list of problems that no matter what cool automation you have, it will not be able to handle them, and you will have to handle the emergency yourself. All right. So any more questions before we go on to the next section?
We're good now.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh.
Pete just snuck one in.
Okay.
How do you deal with dirt, grime that builds up on sensors? Clean them regular
Yeah,
or what?
clean them. I go to my observatory probably on average once every 2 to 3 months and do maintenance. You know, if things are working smoothly, if obviously I'm there more frequently if something goes wrong, but it's about 2.5 hours from me. If you live further, you know, maybe you're a much longer drive from your observatory, then having somebody who's closer to it, who's willing to help, is a big bonus, because they do require some maintenance, some less than others, but yeah, there's always some maintenance.
I'd say that the sensors specifically are generally very robust and don't really require much, cleaning, if anything. The all sky is pretty reliable. The dome, washes away with rain. I don't think either of us have ever had any trouble with dirt or grime on the cloud watcher causing any issues. And then the magnetic switches are very reliable. I've seen, a little bit of steel shaving show up on mine from, the wearing of the roof going back and forth, but that's really about it.
One of mine fell off once. That was
all right. Yeah, I put it back on, I think.
Yeah. And then my other switch for my roof, which is a physical contact that it like the roof rolls over top of basically and pushes down. That can get knocked out of position, so it doesn't fall off or anything. But if it's moved, a slight amount, then it won't register properly. So, tightening those things up every 6 months or so is one of my things that I do. All right.
Okay,
So when do we open? So we open when everything is a go. Cloud temperature and star count, agree. Wetness sensor, raindrop sensor, agree. Humidity sensor below the threshold, wind sensor below the threshold. The moon isn't too much. For example, tonight my observatory is closed even though it's clear because the moon is too much for my threshold. I don't image when the moon is over 90% illuminated and above 10 degrees above the horizon at the same time, because I find that it washes out the image contrast even with, like HA. So I'll wait for the moon phase to be a little bit more favorable or the moon to be a little bit lower before I'll image again. And then I also have the ability to manually lock out the observatory. So that's pretty straightforward. You go when everything is, green. To open the roof, make sure all the mounts are parked, park them if they're not, check all of the park statuses a second time, take control of the roof, block movement of the mounts, open the roof, monitor the opening, detect when it's all the way open, make sure via both roof sensors that it is open, and then release control of the roof and unblock the mount movement. Pretty simple, really. Make sure that everything is done with the roof before you start moving the mounts is essentially the thing. So when you close, it's the reverse. If any one thing is unsafe, any of those sensors is not in a safe condition, then you close. So there is a little bit of a bias towards safety here. You are quicker to close than you are to open. Everything's got to be good to open. Only one thing has to be bad to close. And closing is just the reverse of opening. You got to park everything, make sure it's parked, take control of the roof, block the mount movement, move the roof, monitor it, wait for it to be closed on both sensors, release control of the roof, and then unblock the mount movement. The interesting thing in my system is when we neither open the roof nor close the roof. So there's a sort of control dead zone in between open and close. And the purpose of this dead zone is so that the mount is not oscillating between open and closed all night if it's sort of like partly cloudy or, some sort of marginal condition. So basically, I want the roof to stay open if it's open and stay closed if it's closed if we're in this marginal condition. So it's not good enough for me to be willing to open the roof, but it's not bad enough that I'm going to shut it if it's already open. So this is, passing clouds, that sort of thing, so that you just don't have, the roof is heavy. It takes a lot of energy to move it. It's loud if there's neighbors, so you really just don't want to be moving it back and forth, 10 times a night. So you can kind of see down here on my cloud detection thing how the yellow zone there in the middle is the maintained state. So it's not green, it's not red, so it's not dangerous. I might have some subs that I have to throw out because of passing clouds, but it's not dangerous to be open. So we'll stay open and see what we get. If it gets to red, we close immediately. Same thing if we're closed. If we're closed at the beginning of the night and it's in the yellow, we don't open because it's not going to be great. So wait for it to get into the green. If it gets into the green, we'll open. All right. So questions on that section?
I don't know if it's on that section or not, but since you were talking about moving roofs, what are your mechanics? What machine do you use to move your roof?
So the roof is a rack and pinion motor. It's basically a gate opener motor. It's from Harbor Freight. It's the one that Backyard Observatories uses. They have it for sale on their site, although I'm not sure if Scott is actually selling any of these things anymore because unfortunately he had a stroke earlier this year. But yeah, it's a real shame. But anyhow, it's a great motor, and it's got a very beefy pinion gear on it, and the rack is also, like, I don't know, 1.5 inches wide or something, very deep teeth. Doesn't require a lot of maintenance. Very infrequent need of grease. So it's a very nice motor.
So go down to your local Harbor Freight and check them out, or their Harbor Freight website.
Yeah, you can get it from Harbor Freight. I forget the model number it is, but there's not too many of them. And depending on the size of your observatory, how heavy your roof is, you'll want a different model anyway. So, which model I have is not super relevant. But the most important thing, though, is the rack that it runs on. And I think you can get that. I'm not sure if you can get that at Harbor Freight as well. I know Scott had sold it in the past, but there are some other sources I'm sure you can find on McMaster Car or other places to get a nice rack. But to me, having that good rack gear is probably the most important part because it runs more smoothly and it's beefy. So
on our observatories at GMARS, it's the match between the rack and the pinion that causes most of the problems. Something shifts and something goes loose. So
guys, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I assume that all of your imaging is automated, that you have automated imaging.
Yes.
Right. And that what you're describing is all part of the automation. So how long can you let this run? How many nights if you put in sequences where you don't have to go and check things out?
I'm going to answer this one because Kyle likes to make fun of me sometimes again, because his is weeks, months. I mean,
months. Yeah, no, my longest is, I think the longest I went before touching the computer was like 8 months or something.
I personally like to be slightly more involved in that. Typically I do check on it on a nightly basis. I could let it run as well, but I typically like to go in, check targets, make sure everything's good. But the longer we go, the more reliable things become, the more bugs get worked out, the more hands-off I am with it. And the joke is basically because I always ask Kyle, hey, you gonna image tonight? He's like, sure, yeah, I don't know, it's
whatever whatever the observatory does, it does.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm with you. I go in and look at things because I just like it.
Yeah, I'm not bored of it yet, and that's a good thing, right?
Well, I've,
Yeah,
I've been doing this for 13 years now, I think. So Jeff, you're a little newer to it.
Very much, yeah.
and how do you get your data down? I know it's a separate subject, but
We have it sync. It basically we have a network attached storage that syncs the data to our house over the internet connection. We have a VPN. Each of us has a VPN in between our home network and our observatory network.
so
Yeah,
you have a NAS at your observatory.
he
I
does.
do. Yeah, Jeff doesn't.
I don't.
He sends his directly from the peer PCs to the home one, but I have a NAS on both ends.
And the way that I have that done is I just have a permanent map drive to the NAS or the multiple NASs that I have at home. And then I have a script that runs continuously on that PC looking into the Nina's images folder. And it just copies everything up with the subfolders and the directory structure and so forth. And then I added another script for when I do lucky imaging. So if I do lucky imaging, not using video, so I'm doing DSO lucky imaging on things that aren't bright enough to do sub, 1 second exposures. I'll do 1 second exposures. In the case of those, it auto culls them if it's over, say, 1.5 or 1.7 full width half max. It'll cull them so that they don't waste the bandwidth getting copied up.
Yeah, you have to have multiple NASs at home because you got to back things up. You can't
Yep,
just have one copy.
Oh
exactly.
yeah. No, I always have 4 copies of all my data.
Okay.
All right. So Jeff, your section now.
Okay, so this is the outline of this section, and then I'll dive into the details of each major bullet point. So Kyle's actually going to talk a little bit later about emergency notifications, but the one thing I want to say is that when you're asleep, you want to be woken up if something goes catastrophically wrong and requires your intervention. And text messages are not going to work because you don't want to take your phone off silent while you sleep and get woken up by, whoever's calling you in the middle of the night, trying to sell you something. So we'll get into that a little more later. Ensuring your mounts are really parked before opening. Again, Kyle covered that. Dead power supplies, very high risk failure item. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I actually had one of my astrophysics power supplies fail on me. Technically, it's not an astrophysics power supply. It's made by another company called Meanwell, which is very high quality, but it can happen. And that was in under 12 months. AC power outages, I hinted at that before. Your UPS will power your roof motor and it'll power your PCs and it'll power your mounts, but it'll only power them for a short time. So what you want to have happen is if the AC goes out, you want to close the roof, park the mounts and so forth, and you want to leave them that way, probably for the rest of the night. So you need something that holds all of that closed, even if the power returns. If that's your choice anyway. I wouldn't want my UPS to get nearly drained or drained and then the power come back on and the roof opens again. Software PC goes non-responsive, maybe Nina issues. For example, let's say you disabled Windows updates and it just re-enables them because that's never happened before, right? And it starts rebooting your PC 10 times in the middle of the night. That's literally happened to me. You could have a bug in your Nina sequence, very common, right? As you get more and more complicated with your sequences and your safety stops and coordinating flats between 2 different peers and so forth, that can cause a problem. Windows or Nina itself freezes. I've had that happen. Or any other software bugs or edge cases with Nina sequencers, containers, and so forth. And then lastly, we'll talk about auto resolution to fix problems for you. So the first thing is dead power supplies. If a power supply to your mount goes, you're in trouble, right? Because that's a single point of failure. Your mount can't park and your roof can't close. And it's not something that you can fix remotely. So it is crucial that you have fully redundant power supplies on your mount, unless you have somebody who can, be out there and do it in the middle of the night and they'll actually pick up the phone when you call. So, I mentioned that a Meanwell power supply failed. It's not uncommon. But the solution I've come up with is to use industrial rated DIN mountable power supplies. They have these in factories. They're quite common. They're made to run in extremely harsh environments. They have full specs and ratings on which temperature extremes, humidity extremes, and so forth, vibration, dust, etc., that they'll work in. You get 2 of them per device that you need to power. They make them in all voltages, basically. Although for PCs, like 19 volts, that starts to get hard, but 12 volt, 24 volt, these types of things, 5 volt, very common. And then you get a redundancy module, which sits in between them. And it's basically an active-active cutover. So if one of them drops, the other one will go on. And in the case of my setup, I've also added an Arduino device on every pair of power supplies that monitors the output of each one. And if one of them fails, or both, it alerts me so that I'm aware that I'm down to 1 power supply on that system. So that's very important as well. Next slide, please. All right, so AC power outage detection. So the way that I do it is I bought just a little, it's in green on the right, it's an opto isolator. You wire it directly into your 110 volt outlet, not your UPS. And it'll basically, open or close a signal to an Arduino device or anything else you choose to use to let you know if AC power exists or not. And in the Arduino, I just created a little script that closes a relay module, and it sends power to the Dragonfly, one of the Dragonfly safety sensor inputs. So basically, if the Arduino detects that power has been lost, it sends a signal, it sends voltage to the Dragonfly to tell it power was out, it's unsafe, it's still out, and then it actually holds it there for a certain number of hours, maintaining the unsafe state to the Dragonfly so that it keeps the roof closed, even if the power comes back on. Next slide, please. All right. Mount won't park, software related, right? We talked about the Windows update. There could be a bug in your Nina sequence, a software bug. So there's a lot of different ways around this, and how you choose to do it is going to be specific to the mount that you're working with. Some mounts have APIs that you can call to issue park commands. Other mounts have automated power on park that you can configure to where if you cut power to the mount, and then you turn power back on wherever it was, it'll go to park. If you have that, you can use the web power switch that we talked about earlier to cut and then restore power if that happens. Astrophysics mounts have a safety park feature where if the PC that they're connected with goes dark for more than X seconds, however many that you configure it to, it'll park on its own. So in my case, I wrote a script that actually shuts down power to the pier which has the mount that won't park, and that actually triggers the astrophysics emergency park. Next slide, please. Okay, so last in here, mount strategy. So complete example. So let's go from we're imaging, the scopes are up, everything's great, to something happens. So to kind of back to the start, you have your ASCOM driver, your safety driver, which sits on the piers. It calls the Dragonfly APIs to get the status of every single safety sensor. It also calls the AllSky API to get the star count. And then the central PC, same thing. The Dragonfly will close on its own based on those safety inputs. So what happens is any safety sensor reports unsafe. Well, now the Dragonfly, your peer ASCOM safety drivers, your central ASCOM safety drivers, they all immediately know, and the peer PCs attempt to park them out immediately. Nina and Dragonfly then go into a continuous retry loop trying to close the roof. Things that could cause it to fail are it sees that magnetic park switch is not parked. So it'll wait 60 seconds and then it'll try again and it'll try again. And it just keeps trying until it successfully closes the roof. And then there's a central script that I've created on Windows that watches all of that above unfold. And if the mounts haven't parked in a reasonable amount of time, it cuts the power, as I mentioned previously, which forces the mounts to park. Next slide. And then lastly, you can do some auto recovery things. So for example, if your cloud watcher or your all sky or something goes non-responsive and you're monitoring it, you can use the web power switch to power cycle it. And then if that doesn't fix it, then you can send yourself a push notification to your mobile device to wake you up and let you know that there's something that needs your attention. This is really handy because, you know, I used to have it notify me anytime anything went wrong and wake me up. But, you know, through time and automating these types of things, it really makes it nice that it just heals itself. And I can tell you, when that sound goes off in the middle of the night, I don't know, I'm not going back to bed. So I'm up the rest of the night at that point. So, all right, back to you, Kyle.
All right, questions for Jeff's section there?
Sorry, I have to click my mic back on every time I come back to you. So no, we have no new. Jinyo tells us that to get his data back and forth, he saves his Nina output directly to OneDrive, and he likes that particular answer. But no questions. So
All right. Okay, so let's talk about observability. So this is essentially figuring out, you know, what's going on with your observatory. How do you keep track of it? So this is going to answer the question of why don't I log into my computer at the observatory for 8 months or something and still feel comfortable with knowing what's going on. So for data collection, I collect like almost everything, and I'll show you a dashboard later of what I mean by everything, but almost everything that's going on with any of my telescopes, my mounts, my other devices, my sensors, the roof, the weather, the stars, whatever. I'm collecting all of that and keeping it in a database where I will have access to that data for a very long time until I run out of storage, I guess, but I have a lot of storage on it. So this also gives me a really good source of troubleshooting data. So when I notice that something is not quite right, I can go back and I can see, well, how often does that happen? You know, is this a rare thing? Is it a common thing? What happened when it happened last time? What about the time before that? You know, I can kind of see all of those different things. You know, maybe I can notice, oh, you know what, over time, the star count on my all sky camera is going down. I think that means that, you know, the dome is dirty and needs cleaned, or, you know, maybe it's yellowed because it's acrylic and it needs to be replaced, or, you know, whatever that is. So, you know, you can see these trends of data over time, and I really find it super valuable to collect all of this data. And I also use that data for alerting. So I feed all of my data from Prometheus, which is the sort of time series database where I collect all of it, into a system called Grafana, which does both alerting and dashboarding. So you can see that's the list of all the alerts I have that will send me something. They're not all emergencies, so not all of these things will wake me up. So for example, you know, if one of my Nina instances is down, but it's not an unsafe condition, you know, like the mount is parked, it's safe, I'm not going to have that wake me up. That's, you know, I'll lose some imaging time maybe, but it's not a safety issue. I only have myself woken up for actual safety issues. Same thing for, you know, things like, oh, maybe the disk is starting to get full on my NAS or something. Yeah, okay, I can handle that the next day. So I have that alert set to only triggered, you know, during the day kind of thing. And so how do I get these alerts? So, you know, this is both Jeff and I use the ground station plugin with pushover. This is actually his slide, so sorry, Jeff, for talking on your slide. But basically, we just get notifications sent as push notifications to our phone. You can set certain alerts as ones that'll bypass the do not disturb on your phone. So at night, you know, you have your phone on do not disturb. It'll still play a very annoying noise and wake you up, and you know, your wife will probably be upset at you, but other than that, you know, at least it'll give you a chance to intervene if there's something truly wrong. I don't generally have any trouble going back to sleep afterwards. I know Jeff said he's basically up for the duration if that happens. I pretty much fix whatever. I keep my laptop next to my bed, so if I get woken up, I'll fix it on my laptop, go back to sleep. So. And here is my dashboard. So, I know it's kind of a small view. It's not really important to see all of the different data, but you can see that there's a lot of data that I keep on my dashboard so that I know just at a glance. I can go to this website from my phone, from my computer, anywhere. I can go and see what's going on with my observatory. I can see the last image that each of my 2 telescopes took. I can see the observing plan for the night. It's laid out up there with little color bars that says what time it's going to change targets, if there's any wait times built in because of the moon's going to be too high or whatever. It'll tell me what my last target was, what is that image of, how's my guiding doing, what's the star count on the all sky camera, how much wind is there, what's the weather sensors saying, how full is my NAS, is my dehumidifier on? Is my roof closed or open? Are my scopes parked? All those kind of things. So, it's very comprehensive, and it really gives a whole lot of data about what's going on. And, that's my primary interface to my observatory. So I don't need to log into the PCs to know what's going on. I don't need to look at Nina directly. I can just go to my dashboard and I can see everything I really need to see. And other than that, I just, collect the data. And you can't see it in this image of this dashboard, but further down on the right column is a list of all the targets and the percent complete they are based on my observing plan. So when a target is completed, I'll see it on there. So I'll know that I can pull that data off and go process it and hopefully get another top pick. So I love having the dashboard view of everything. Ever since I had 2 systems running, I just felt like it's much nicer to see everything in one place rather than having to log into computers with remote desktop or something like that that's inconvenient to do from a phone or anything else.
By the way, Kyle, I think wife annoyed at you is an essential part of astrophotography.
I think you're probably right. That is true, especially if she knows how much you spent on all this stuff.
We all have to laugh at that.
Yeah, I always tell her, if I croak, don't sell this stuff for what I told you I paid for it.
You got a couple of questions.
All
Alex,
right.
you want to? Alex, you're muted, Alex.
What ISP do you use? Is it solid enough to provide the needed bandwidth? Is there a backup? Starlink T1's dial-up? Tell us about your communications between you and the remote site.
Sure. So we are fantastically lucky in that there is a very local, I think it's just like 1 county or maybe 2, rural fiber provider in the area where our observatories are. And Deer Lake Astronomy Village is fully wired with fiber to every home site. So you can actually get up to gigabit fiber connection there. And, knock on wood, we have actually never had an internet outage, when it wasn't also like a power outage or something. I think maybe we had one that was for a few minutes or something. They were doing some maintenance on it, but it has been rock solid for as long as we've been there. And it's very fast. I think I have the 500 megabit plan. I'm not sure which one Jeff has, but it's plenty fast enough to get all of my data very quickly in the morning. I have it synced to my home NAS from my observatory NAS each morning. It's been just fantastic. At home, I also have a fiber connection. I have gigabit fiber at home, so it's fast on both sides. And I have a permanent VPN connection established between the 2. So from my home or from my phone, which is on a VPN to my home network, I'm always on the same network with my observatory. So it's like it's all, sitting in my house, basically. I can remote desktop to it if I need to. I can go, directly to any of my sensors. I don't have to jump through any hoops. I can just access it like it was on my local network. I use WireGuard VPN.
John at Astra wants to know, with this information you've talked about gathering from your star count and your cloud, all that stuff that you got, your cloudiness, etc. Can you save that in your metadata in a subframe?
Yes, yes. And I've actually been working on adding more and more of that to my FITS headers of my metadata. So I wrote a plugin for Nina that will pull data out of my observatory database and add it as FITS headers to the saved images. And that's been so valuable because, if the star count in an image is low, there's so many things that could cause the star count of the image to be low. But if you know that the star count from the all sky was low at the same time, then you're pretty sure that the reason why the star count is low in the image is because there were clouds.
Now, is that thing that you wrote, is that available to other people?
It's not, because it's very specific to my setup. But I'm working on making it more generic. So I have a set of Nina plugins that I've written and a whole bunch of other software for this stuff that I would like to make more generic and share with others. I do consulting for other people setting up their observatories, and so frequently I'll reuse these plugins and things. Help with others, give them access to those things as well. But I would like to make them sort of publicly available for at least anybody who has a similar enough setup where it would be useful.
Thank you. And Jim Bishop is giving some advice about what we tell our spouses about the cost of things, but that's not exactly a question. It's something we all believe in. So, and that's it for the questions out of the chat.
Yeah, actually, I tell my wife, no matter what, you could probably sell the telescope for just about what I paid for it. Of course, I have all my fingers crossed when I do that.
Yeah, I have a list of the value of every item that I provide to my insurer, because they require an itemization and an invoice and things in order to insure them. And when you're 2.5 hours away from a whole lot of stuff sitting in an observatory, you definitely want it to be insured. That's another thing that should be on your list of emergency preparation. That's somewhere where if the stuff needed to be sold, you'd know what the real value was based on the insurance manifest.
Who's
After
your insurance?
I use State Farm, and the policy that I have is basically the same policy as a photographer, like a professional photographer would use, where it covers named items, and they're covered for all hazards. So it doesn't matter what happens to it, even if the roof runs into it, or you drop it, or it falls out the back of your truck on the way to the observatory. It's covered for all those things. It's a zero deductible policy. It's quite expensive, the insurance, but to me, it's just worth it. It's just, I spent so much money on this stuff. I just have to have that peace of mind.
Kyle, just a second, Eric.
Okay.
How you can stop sharing your screen
sure.
if you got that information out and everything, and then we'll just see you when you talk.
Sure.
Okay.
So it's not covered by homeowners insurance. That's a separate policy. Right?
No, yeah, so my homeowner's insurance does cover the physical observatory building. So, if there were windstorm damage to the observatory or something like that, hail damage, fire, anything like that, it would cover that. But it does not cover the contents, because those are specifically excluded, because I have a separate policy for it. They would be covered up to a small limit with the deductible, but of course, your house has quite in order for it to be worth making a claim on homeowners insurance, for it to exceed the deductible, the damage would have to be quite a bit, and then you'd only get depreciated value, not replacement value usually for these things. So I have a separate policy.
Yeah, so do I.
So when you're have all these safety conditions that you're handling, when you were setting things up, did you simulate failure so that things worked?
That's an excellent question. I meant to put this in here. Yes, for like 3 months before I installed things in my observatory, I had my entire observatory set up in a spare bedroom in my house with a roof controller that powered not a real roof, with sensors that were like, I had an all sky camera that was sitting in my backyard and a weather sensor in my backyard, and all hooked up to this thing so that it would simulate opening and closing the roof in different situations and move the mounts around. And yeah, so that was incredibly valuable to do that. I never would have been able to have the thing automated and working basically from day one, which it was, if I had not done that before I installed it all in the observatory.
You know,
It's
that sounds like another conversation with your wife.
Yeah, thankfully we have a 6-bedroom house, and so we have a number of spare rooms. But yeah, I do get in trouble for taking them over with my hobbies, because I tend to, oh, I have another hobby, I'll use another room. So,
We're,
the
we're all laughing, but we're not really.
I'd add that the safety devices are very easy to simulate, because generally speaking, the way it works is it's just an open or a closed signal is how the majority of them work. So with the Dragonfly, all the safety sensor inputs work by, there's an for each sensor, there's an outgoing 5-volt pin and an incoming sensor pin, and it's either open or it's closed. So you could just use toggle switches or tape wires together or whatever to simulate the various sensors and test your scripts.
yep. Yeah, don't forget to test what happens during time changes. We just had one of those, but that's another thing that can trip you up. I mean, there's just so many things. Once you've gotten through a whole year with the observatory automated, usually you've run into all of the sort of common things, at least. But I mean, we still run into things that we haven't seen before. I mean, Jeff's power supply issue. You just recently had an issue with Nina that was an edge case with the, what was it? It was the roof needed to close during a meridian flip or something.
Yeah, it wasn't actually, I don't think it was, yeah, no, it was the roof close. Basically, there was the trigger for unsafe, and then the trigger for meridian flip. If they fire within milliseconds, the safety trigger will not activate. So if your meridian flips can take a long time, obviously, because it has to flip, it has to autofocus, it has to plate solve, it has to resume guiding. And if you have any type of deadband that you've configured to avoid peer collision, where you stop tracking a few minutes before, you could be flipping for 15 minutes. And if you got unsafe conditions during that time, that wouldn't be good. I've found a way around it. But to Kyle's point, yes, absolutely. There are things that you just can't predict.
Yeah, and we're both fairly prolific providers of bugs to Nina, and the target target planner plugin specifically. All that stuff on the dashboard I pull out of an API that I wrote for the target planner that'll be merged into that public version soon. So that'll be handy to have for other people to use that API. Target Scheduler is the name of the plugin. It's an amazing plugin. Really highly recommend it. It's great to work with an open source piece of software that has such a supportive community. Can't recommend Nina highly enough. If you're using something else, really take a look at it. I mean, I used Voyager before, which is gold standard in almost every way. And I would probably still be using it, except for the fact that I just want to do so many custom things that, being able to write my own plugins and things is just so valuable. So yeah, highly recommend Nina and the Target Scheduler plugin as well.
I use Voyager, and I use Tim Hutchison's automation, and you can write your own scripts in Voyager.
Yeah, you can have scripts, but you know, the scripts are in the drag script, and so you know, if you want to start getting a little more fancy than the things you can do in there, you can run external programs. There's ways to do it. Certainly, Voyager can do everything that Nina can do. It's, you know, does things in a different way. I love Voyager too. I don't have religion on that, but certainly if you love Voyager, Voyager is great as well. But if you're using something other than Nina or Voyager, I definitely recommend that you look at Nina or Voyager, because they are very far and away the best things that you can use to control an observatory these days.
You know, I think we've kind of reached the end of our program. We got all our questions asked, so
Eric,
more questions?
no, I've got one something to say. You know, Jaime is been running this program, and he's been doing a lot of tricky things, because usually the person who runs the program has to put our little faces in one place or another, and he's been putting the comments from everybody as he goes along and everything. He's been doing a great job tonight. I just wanted to give him a shout out. So there.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jaime.
so,
Thank you.
Kyle, Jeff, thanks so much. My telescope hasn't fallen off my mount. Our automation isn't near as complicated as what you have, probably because I'm not a programmer, and I think a lot of us are. So anything you could write for Nina, I'm sure would be appreciated, as long as you could punch buttons. So we're come to the end of our show. Thank you, everyone online that stayed with us, and thank you, Kyle and Jeff. We stay on the line a little bit if you'd like to, once we close the program. You're certainly welcome to stay. And Jaime, you're running the program. You want to say goodbye to everyone?
Bye.
We'll see you all in a couple of weeks. We'll